I am 73 years old. I was at the grocery store the Tuesday before Thanksgiving last year, standing in front of the deep chest freezers in the meat department. Linda had asked me to pick up a 20-pound frozen turkey. I leaned over the icy edge of the freezer, got both of my hands firmly under the bird, planted my boots on the linoleum, and tried to pull it up. My arms shook a little, but it was my legs that completely betrayed me. The back of my thighs felt like empty air. There was zero leverage, zero drive, zero power pushing up from the floor. I actually felt my lower back pulled dangerously tight to compensate for the dead weight in my legs. I had to lean my stomach against the rim of the freezer and practically roll the frozen bird up my own chest just to drop it into the shopping cart. A young kid wearing a store apron walked by and asked if I needed a hand. I waved him off out of pride, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked the rest of the aisles, pushing the cart heavily, leaning my weight on the handle, realizing how much raw strength had quietly leaked out of my body. I spent 30 years walking the concrete floors of a distribution warehouse. I moved heavy wooden pallets, I climbed steel stairs, and I spent 12 hours a day on my feet without ever thinking twice about carrying my own weight. When you earn your living with your back and your legs, you just assume that kind of dense muscle is permanently baked into your bones. You think you get to keep it forever, but you do not. I drove home from the grocery store that afternoon in absolute silence, staring at the road, trying to figure out when my legs had become so incredibly hollow. I did not want to admit that I was shrinking. My daughter Megan came over that weekend to help Linda prepare the house for the holiday. She is an occupational therapist, and she spends her entire week working with older folks who are desperately trying to hold on to their independence. I made the mistake of mentioning how heavy the turkey seemed to be getting these days. She did not laugh. She sat down at the kitchen counter and told me about a medical paper she had been reading at her clinic. It tracked men in their late 60s and 70s, and it showed that an older man can lose a massive 8% of his muscle mass every single decade. She told me that over 60% of men my age are living with severe muscle wasting and do not even realize it until they fail to lift something they used to carry with one hand. They think they are just getting older. The reality is that they are quietly starving the muscle right off their own skeletons. I spent the next 3 weeks looking at every single thing I was doing, but specifically I looked at every single thing I was putting on my plate. I treated my own body like a broken engine that I needed to diagnose. I realized that my daily routine was actively accelerating the muscle loss in my legs. I narrowed the problem down to 4 specific things. 3 of them were massive mistakes I was making every single day because I believed the lies we are told about eating light as we get older. The 4th thing was one incredibly cheap, incredibly simple protein I started eating every single day that completely stopped the weakness and put the heavy armor back on my legs. I am going to tell you exactly what all 4 of these things are. We have to talk about the mistakes first because you cannot build a strong foundation if you are still using rotten lumber. The first mistake I had to completely abandon was eating soup and crackers for lunch. For the last 5 years, I thought I was doing my body a favor by eating a light lunch. I would heat up a bowl of canned vegetable soup and eat it with a handful of saltine crackers. I thought it was easy on the digestion. I thought it was keeping my weight down since I was not working in the warehouse anymore. What I was actually doing was sending my body into a severe catabolic state. When you get to be my age, your body does not hold on to muscle easily. It requires a constant heavy stream of raw building blocks to maintain the walls. If you eat a bowl of broth and empty carbohydrates for lunch, you are giving your stomach something to do, but you are giving your muscles absolutely nothing. Because the body still needs fuel to keep your heart beating and your lungs pumping, it starts looking for it elsewhere. It turns to your legs. I was literally forcing my body to tear down the muscle in my own thighs just to keep the furnace burning until dinner time. Megan showed me a clinical study that looked at older adults who skipped heavy protein at lunch versus those who ate dense, protein-heavy midday meals. The group eating the light lunches lost their lean muscle mass at an alarming rate over a 2-year period. Their bodies were constantly cannibalizing their own tissue for energy. It made me think of my old neighbor, Arthur. Arthur is 76. He started eating nothing but a small salad and a piece of bread for lunch every day because he read it was good for his heart. Last spring, I watched him try to push himself up from a booth at the local diner. His legs had absolutely no drive left in them. He had to rock back and forth 3 times and pull himself up by the edge of the table. His light lunches had cost him his leg strength. I threw every sleeve of crackers in my pantry straight into the garbage. The second mistake was buying expensive paper-thin deli meats. When I did make a sandwich, I used to buy those plastic tubs of ultra-lean, low-fat turkey breast. I saw the commercials. I read the labels. I thought I was getting my protein without the bad fats. I thought I was outsmarting my own aging process by eating clean. I was dead wrong. An older body is incredibly stubborn. It does not respond to weak, highly processed protein the way a young body does. It requires heavy, complete protein sources paired with natural animal fats to actually trigger the muscle-building process. Those thin, processed deli meats are stripped of the natural fats and cholesterol that an older man's body desperately needs to produce the hormones that maintain physical strength. The protein in those plastic tubs is weak. When you eat it, the body barely registers that it arrived. You are eating food, but the construction site inside your legs remains completely shut down. I found a research trial that compared older men consuming heavily processed low-fat meats versus thick, whole animal proteins. The men eating the processed deli slices continued to lose strength in their lower body. Their muscles did not respond to the weak signal. The men eating the heavy, whole proteins actually triggered new muscle growth because the animal fat helped their bodies absorb the nutrients and synthesize the protein. I realized I was chewing on expensive rubber and expecting my body to turn it into steel. A guy I know from church named William used to brag about his low-fat turkey sandwiches. Last winter, his legs simply gave out while he was walking down his front steps. The muscle had nothing left in the tank to hold his weight. I stopped buying that processed meat the exact same afternoon. The third mistake was trusting those little plastic bottles of nutritional shakes. Linda started bringing them home because they were marketed to seniors. They promised they had all the vitamins and protein an older body needed. I started drinking one every afternoon when I felt a little tired. I thought I was taking medicine. I was actually drinking liquid candy. What nobody tells you about those popular senior shakes is that they are loaded with processed sugars and incredibly low-quality soy protein isolate. When you drink a bottle of liquid sugar, it causes a massive spike in insulin. That insulin spike creates a wave of inflammation that completely blocks your body from repairing muscle tissue. And the soy protein inside those bottles does not contain enough of the specific amino acids an older engine needs to turn the ignition. I was flooding my system with sugar, shutting down my muscle repair, and feeding my body a protein it could not even use. I read a paper from a university that tracked men over 65 who relied on liquid meal replacements versus solid, whole foods. The men drinking the sugary shakes experienced a significant reduction in functional grip strength and leg power. The sugar was keeping their nervous system inflamed, and the weak protein was quietly starving their legs. My brother-in-law Robert fell into this trap. He drank 2 of those shakes a day, thinking he was extending his life. Last Thanksgiving, he asked me to open a simple jar of cranberry sauce for him because his grip strength was completely gone. His forearms looked hollow. He traded his physical capability for a sugary drink in a plastic bottle. I poured every single one of those shakes down the drain. Taking away the soup, the deli meat, and the sugary shakes stopped the damage. I had stopped poisoning the environment, but my legs still felt incredibly hollow when I tried to walk up the stairs. I needed to figure out what my body was actually begging for. I needed a specific material that could rebuild the foundation without emptying my wallet. That is when I found the 4th thing on this list, the single cheap food that changed everything for me. I started eating a thick, heavy patty of 80/20 ground beef every single day for lunch. I am talking about standard cheap hamburger meat, not the extra lean stuff, the cheap stuff with 20% fat. I realized that my older body needed a very specific, aggressive type of fuel to force the muscles to stop shrinking and start growing again. And regular ground beef is arguably the most perfect source of that fuel on the planet. Ground beef is packed with the highest concentration of an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is the spark plug. It is the exact key required to start the engine of muscle repair in an aging body. Without a massive dose of leucine, an older body simply refuses to build muscle. But ground beef has something else just as important. It is loaded with highly bioavailable creatine, which gives the muscle fibers the immediate electrical energy they need to contract with force. And the 20% animal fat is the crucial carrier. That saturated fat gives an older man's body the exact raw material it needs to naturally synthesize the hormones that keep us strong and aggressive. I read a staggering study that looked specifically at older men consuming thick patties of whole ground beef versus men eating lean, processed proteins. The results were undeniable. The men eating the heavy ground beef completely stopped their muscle wasting. Their bodies grabbed that dense, rich nutrient profile, used the fat for hormone production, and aggressively repaired the muscle fibers in their legs. The leucine forced their stubborn muscles to respond exactly the way a younger man's muscles would. They were feeding their bodies the exact raw materials needed to pour fresh concrete and reinforce the foundation. I was absolutely floored. We had spent decades running away from red meat because we were told it was bad for us, and in the process we had starved ourselves of the one cheap food that could actually keep us independent. I did not wait around. The very next day I formed a thick patty of 80-20 ground beef, put it in a hot cast iron skillet, and cooked it in its own fat. I put a little salt and black pepper on it and ate it with a fork. I did it the next day, and the day after that. It cost me almost nothing, but it was the heaviest, most satisfying meal I had eaten in years. The change was not magic. You do not reverse a decade of muscle loss in a week. But about 6 weeks after I threw away the crackers and started eating the heavy beef every day, I was out in the garage. Linda had bought a 50-pound bag of garden soil, and it was sitting in the trunk of her car. I walked over, popped the trunk, reached in, and grabbed the plastic corners of the bag. I braced myself, expecting the familiar hollow feeling in my thighs. I pulled the bag up. My leg simply fired. The muscle tightened like a steel cable, and I lifted the weight out of the trunk without a single tremble. I stood there in the driveway, holding 50 pounds of wet dirt against my chest, feeling the solid ground under my boots, and I realized the weakness was gone. The strength was back. The heavy armor was holding. When you get to be my age, the things that matter are incredibly simple. If your legs go, your freedom goes right out the door with them. Muscle does not just vanish because the calendar turns over. It goes when you stop giving it a reason to stay, and it goes when you starve it of the thick, heavy fuel it needs to survive. You do not have to watch your world shrink. You do not have to accept that getting something out of a freezer is going to be a terrifying experience for the rest of your life. You just have to be willing to look at your plate and have the courage to stop eating like a bird. I am going to head out to the backyard now. Derek is bringing his kids over, and we have a heavy wooden swing set to assemble on the grass. My legs are going to carry my weight, and they are going to hold me steady while I work. Take care of your body, feed it the heavy materials it actually needs, and do not let anyone tell you that weakness is just part of the deal. I will be right here if you want to talk again.